Hello, I am Peter Okwache. Welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. Tackling the problem of mental health in Africa, we have a special report on the indignities sufferers face and look at what can be done. More than 50 are dead after a bus crashes in Western Kenya. 8 children are amongst the victims. We report from Malawi, where double Olympic champion Kelly Holmes is on a mission to promote sport and improve lives. We start tonight with a problem that all countries need to address. It's an issue that's often ignored, brushed under the carpet, or seen as someone else's problem. Today is World Mental Health Day, and around the globe, people are taking the opportunity to draw attention to the importance of mental health. 1 in 4 people will be affected by mental health disorders at some point in their lives. In Africa, mental illness is considered a silent epidemic, particularly affecting those aged under 35 years. But on average, low-income countries spend just 0.5% of their health budget on mental health. In Ghana, for example, there are just 25 psychiatrists for a population of 30 million people. Because of the lack of medical support, many with mental health problems turn to prayer camps and traditional healing for help. But a BBC investigation has found that in one case, a prayer camp is now putting those with mental health issues in cages. From Ghana, here's the BBC's Sile Lancer and a warning that you may find part of his report upsetting.
Praying away their problems. These worshippers at Mount Horeb Prayer Camp believe they are possessed by the devil and are in need of deliverance. Because of a lack of psychiatrists in Ghana, desperate families pay prayer camps to treat their mentally ill relatives. Backstage is a different story. The most vulnerable live here in these basic shelters, chained to the walls and the floor.
This is how they treat people like us. They think we are mad or something.
The government outlawed chaining last year, but the leader of this church says the change must be done slowly.
We are gradually going away from it, but it's not easy because we don't have the facilities to confine them. And the moment we stop what we are doing, you see a whole lot of mental people walking on the streets of Ghana.
This is one of 7 psychiatric hospitals in Ghana. It's expensive and only has space for 20 patients. The owner believes you don't need any form of restraint.
Chaining is wrong. A lot of the times what you find out is that the aggression, the violence is actually from anger, from being violated, etc.
That violation doesn't just include chaining. We had been told that this prayer camp in the town of Edumfa is using cages to beat the ban on chains. I visited the camp with a secret camera. A member of staff told me how they deal with difficult patients. But that room is full of cages. You can see the patients lying on the floor. I went into one of the cages. I felt restricted and couldn't stand up straight. Not ideal for someone with mental health issues. The camp insists that the conditions are good and that they are protecting society from what they call deranged people.
Okay. Caging somebody is a human rights violation. It is unlawful, and I condemn it in no uncertain terms as a human rights lawyer. And I believe that the Commission on Human Rights, the Ghana Police, the Ministry of Health, the Ghana Health Service should move in to address and stop caging of mental health patients in prayer camps in Ghana.
We then went to a traditional healing center that also helps the mentally ill. We found 16 men chained in one room. One of them told us he had been there for 7 years.
Government is trying to enforce its ban on the use of chains. But for centers like this, it is too expensive to build rooms for each patient.
They claim chaining is the only option.
Chaining is banned, and we are taking steps to make sure we go around the country to enforce the ban.
So those who now are caging them, which is even more, of a human rights issue, what are you doing about it?
Likewise, the chaining. So what we are doing is that we are bringing them for training. The prayer comes, the proprietors, the owners. After you've done the training, if they persist, whoever persists will be taken as having violated the law.
Mental health is a worldwide challenge, and Ghana's government is failing to help those most in need. Sule Lanza, BBC News, Ghana.
Well, let's get more now from Victor Ugo. He's a medical doctor with a special focus on mental health and is also the founder of the NGO Mentally Aware Nigeria Initiative. Thanks for joining us, Victor. This is a global crisis, but how bad is it in Africa?
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me. It's a global crisis, but it's really, really bad in Africa because if you consider the fact that 75% of people that are mentally ill are seen in low and middle income countries, which Africa has a lot of those countries. You say that, of course, and then there's another statistics that says that 80% of those people that live in those countries don't have access to proper mental health care. So when you don't have proper mental health facilities, you're going to see people looking for alternatives. And that's really what's happening there.
You talk about these alternatives that people seek. We've seen that shocking report of people being chained in Ghana and being put in cages. I know it also happens in Nigeria.
Yes, it does.
But how widespread are such acts on the continent?
The thing is this, that I think much of what happens is that because of the lack of education for mental health, or for mental illnesses, you find that people are very afraid of what they don't know. It's as simple as that. And if you don't understand something, then you blame it on what you can, just think is supernatural. And how do you cure something that you think is supernatural? By taking them to prayer houses and to traditional homes. So that's really the issue. So it's very much widespread in Africa. We have, we have a lot of countries that, have a lot of cultural practices. And most importantly, they have a lot of spiritual or religious inclination. So it's very, very much common in most parts of Africa. I mean, in Nigeria, it's very common. In Ghana, you can see from the video that we just watched. In Kenya, in Tanzania, it's very common.
And what are the consequences of these crude methods for the sufferers?
Well, the first thing is that they don't get the actual help that they need. And then it's more or less, it makes the situation worse for them. They are subjected to very, very inhumane conditions. And it's sort of, it reflects on who they're going to look. It's like in the future, you think that someone like that will actually have a very good life. No, it's not possible. So it does reflect on their persons in the future if they ever get out of it.
And are you noticing any efforts to change these attitudes anywhere on the continent?
Not necessarily. I think, like I told you, it seems like most people just want to blame it on spiritual issues, and the government doesn't really have the political will to pull through, and the people are not really concerned about it because obviously in their heads mental health is something that is it's really mostly the spiritual aspect, so it's nothing that the government should be concerned about. But we have organizations that are actually really talking about it in terms of trying to bring up awareness and advocacy for mental health issues and trying to educate people about what it means to be mentally ill and what it means to have a mental health. I think once that spreads around the continent, then we can start to see improvements beyond that. But other than that, it feels like the government needs to start doing more in terms of actually acting rather than just because they get to sign a lot of declarations for independence, for human rights. But beyond just signing, beyond the action of just signatures, you find the government doesn't do much more than just signing. They have.
What would you like to see the government do, Victor? Because if you ask them, they'll say, listen, we know we should be doing more, but we don't really have the funding to do anything.
You don't need funding to make sure that your legislature passes updated mental health acts. And when you have those mental health acts as laws and you put punishments for discriminatory practices, for human rights abuses, you find that those things reduce. You see, we've seen it in high-income countries or other countries that they have updated mental health laws. You find that most African countries don't have updated mental health laws. My country, for example, Nigeria, has a law that has been in existence since 1957. It's called the Lunacy Act. So how do you expect someone that is called a lunatic to be treated? In chains. So it's really just simple. So you don't need funding to be able to put to be able to put better laws that can actually affect the human rights declarations that you've gone around to sign across the world.
And what about ordinary citizens in these countries, family members to these people with mental health issues? What should they be doing? What could they be doing?
Well, the thing is, they don't know what they should be doing, which is why they are doing what they're doing. So it's actually just on the government to push advocacy on individual organizations like ourselves to start to do more about pushing more advocacy towards those that we think that they're just literate, but they're mentally illiterate people. So they don't know much about mental health. So that's really about it. So we need to put more effort into anti-stigma programs, into advocacy programs, and that's where we need support for, really.
And Victor, just very briefly, in your travels across the continent, I mean, if you could name one or two countries that is actually doing more than other countries, that is actually beginning to update these laws, as you put it, I mean, which countries would you name?
Well, it's funny because Ghana has a very updated mental health system. I mean, and they're still working on it. But Rwanda, Ethiopia, I think they have stronger things going on for them.
Victor Ugo, mental health advocacy advocate there, talking to us here on Focus on Africa. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa. Local elections have been held in Mozambique. President Filipe Nyusi was one of the first to cast his vote. His ruling Frelimo party has been accused of violence and intimidation during the campaign. The main opposition Renamo party, which has maintained an armed wing since the end of the country's civil war, is running in the municipal polls for the first time in 10 years. The general election takes place next year. Some fast food chains and clothing retailers in Zimbabwe have closed indefinitely amidst a cash crisis just 2 months after President Emerson Mnangagwa won his first election. They say they are no longer able to restock as suppliers are demanding payment in hard currency. The country has used a local note pegged to the US dollar, but it has rapidly lost value over the last few weeks. Tunisia's parliament has passed a law criminalizing all forms of racial discrimination. The legislation is designed to end violence and discrimination against the country's black minority. More than 60,000 African immigrants and more than 4,000 African students live in Tunisia. Police in Kenya say at least 50 people have died in a bus accident in the Western Rift Valley region. The bus was traveling from the capital Nairobi towards Kisumu when the driver lost control and plunged down a slope in a notorious accident black spot. The BBC's Ferdinand Omondi has more.
This mangled wreck is all that remains of the bus that left Nairobi for Western Kenya but never arrived at the destination. The accident occurred in the early hours of Wednesday, and neighboring locals were the first responders.
I woke up when I heard the crash and came here, as did other people. We found passengers screaming and asking for help, and we managed to save some who were alive, but I don't think it was any more than 10 people. The others were already dead.
Police believe the driver lost control of the bus, which then hit a guardrail before plunging into the valley below. Hardly anyone survived.
Out of that accident, we have lost 50 lives. That is 31 men, 12 women, and 7 children. The bodies have been moved to Kericho County Hospital mortuary.
Kenya's Police Chief Joseph Boynet now says the bus wasn't licensed to operate at night. But police roadblocks are always on the highways, and questions will be asked how the bus passed multiple police checkpoints without a license. Kenya has previously banned night travel in a bid to contain road accidents, but authorities have often backed down after protests from transport operators believed to be well connected in government. Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta sent his condolences via Twitter, but angry Kenyans responded by demanding more accountability from his administration. Official government statistics show that about 3,000 people die annually on Kenyan roads, but the World Health Organization has numbers as high as 13,000. A worrying trend as the country heads towards the December holidays, when transport figures shoot up as families travel far and wide to unite for Christmas and New Year festivities. Ferdinand Omondi, BBC News, Nairobi, Kenya.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okwoche. Join us again after the break. Welcome back. Governments must spend more on preserving global nature. That's one of the messages that leaders from Africa and other parts of the world will hear as they converge in London for a two-day conference on how to tackle the illegal wildlife trade. Botswana has one of the world's largest elephant populations, but the president is facing accusation of covering up the killings of 87 of them last month. The government dismissed the claims, saying that the numbers were false and misleading. But do they accept there's been a significant increase in poaching? That's the question I put to President Mongwetsi Masisi.
I do not agree there's been a spike in poaching in Botswana. But when the story broke, as a responsible government, we were concerned. We were alive and agile, and we sprung to action. We investigated very thoroughly. And part of the investigation involved the participation of the gentleman who made the allegation.
Dr. Mike Chase from the Elephants Without Borders.
Yes. And he went on a recce with officials of the Department of Wildlife and the Botswana Defence Force to locate or help locate the carcasses as alleged. On the first day they located 10 carcasses. On the second day they located 9. And as far as I have been informed, they were able to locate those 19. But of the 19, very few proved to be as a result of poaching.
But you seem, in a certain way, to disregard the expertise that the Elephants Without Borders have. I mean, these are experts in the ecology of elephants, but you are dismissing their claims. I mean, you've gone out on a recce for 2 days, your teams have gone out on a recce for 2 days, and that seems to be it.
Anybody who makes an assertion that such and such occurred is duty bound also to prove it. And we have the responsibility to search for it. When we search, when we invite others to search, when we invite the protagonist in this case to demonstrate that, and it is not so, what are we left with? What option are we left with?
Is there a shoot-to-kill policy in place against poachers?
The general tendency is for poachers to open fire on law enforcement agents, open fire to kill. And in the thick of the bushes of Botswana, when that happens, our security forces, in defense not only of our territorial integrity, but in defense of our laws, open fire. And it's not very easy to maim in the thickets of the bush. So if killing occurs, it is out of such circumstance.
Would you like to see a return to elephant hunting in Botswana?
It's essential for the country to return to a position where we have sustainable conservation. And right now, the numbers that we have, given the challenges that we do of our space and ecosystem, it's not.
Speaking there to Botswana's President Mokgweetsi Masisi. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's now time for some sports, and the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers have resumed across the continent. 2 third-round matches are taking place today. Earlier, a goalless draw was played out between Ethiopia and Kenya in Group F. In the other game, in Group K, Zambia are currently ahead against Guinea-Bissau. The Confederation of African Football has called off Sierra Leone's back-to-back Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers with Ghana. It said the decision to cancel the matches had been made as Sierra Leone didn't meet FIFA's conditions for lifting the suspension. The world governing body imposed the suspension on the country's FA in the wake of sanctions imposed on its president, Aisha Johansson, and General Secretary Chris Kamara. Both have denied any wrongdoing. Libya coach Adel Amrouche has resigned just days before their 2019 Africa Cup of Nations qualifier against Nigeria. The Libyan Football Federation confirmed his departure. It said that his assistant Omar Al-Mirimi will take over in the interim. The federation are looking to take action against Amrouche after his sudden departure. BBC Sport understands that one of his main complaints was unpaid wages.
It's sad to think about what happened just 2 days before our match against Nigeria. I hope it will not have a negative impact on us. We now have Omar Al-Mariami in charge, who has experience and was with us in the CHAN competition and knows the players very well. I hope we will be in good condition and forget what happened over these last few hours.
And let's bring you an update on show jumper Bunty Howard. We brought you her story earlier this year. Bunty successfully qualified to represent Zambia at the Youth Olympics in Buenos Aires, a first for the country. Well, the games have kicked off, and Bunty, who has also been nominated for the competition's Rising Star Award, completed 2 perfect clear rounds as part of the team event, helping Africa to take bronze. In tennis, South Africa's Kevin Anderson easily went through to the last 16 of the Shanghai Masters after defeating Mikhail Kukushkin in straight sets. 7-seeded Anderson, who had a bye in the first round, converted all 3 of his breakpoints, winning 6-3, 6-2 in just over an hour. He will now play Greece's Stefanos Tsitsipas. Now, we'll stay on the theme of sports. The biggest thing you can have here is hope. Those are the words of British double Olympic champion Kelly Holmes, who is in Malawi on a mission to improve lives through sport. She's taking part in a series of endurance challenges to inspire and motivate young people. From Malawi, Juliet Parkin reports.
They came from local schools, villages and across the Malawian countryside to run. And somewhere in the pack was an Olympic champion. This was every much her dream as theirs.
So we've just done a run for the village. It's really good to engage the kids.
They are natural-born runners here, accustomed to the dusty tracks, the undulations and the African heat. The wealth of talent here is both exciting and frustrating for an athlete so passionate about sport at grassroots.
The talent here is amazing. We've just done a 5K run. Most of the kids are, they're all primary school children. They're running with us, keeping with us, sprinting past us. It's amazing, but that's why they need to have more sport in schools in particular. To nurture the talent, to take them on to higher things, which gives them opportunities to change in their lives.
Malawi is one of the poorest countries in the world, and sport suffers from a lack of investment, largely because it's not seen as a prosperous career choice. But the Malawi sports minister says Dame Kelly's visit could change that.
We believe that learning from what she has gone through, we probably will be able to say what is it that we can do better here. Our hope is that our youth in the country will emulate what she has achieved. Our hope is that one day we'll be able, at a global scale, produce a champion.
Kelly Holmes came to Malawi with a team of male and female athletes taking part in an annual campaign called Sport with a Purpose. Organised by a UK travel company, its aim is to change lives through sport and tourism. Juliet Parkin, BBC News, Zomba in Malawi.
Great stuff. And that's it from Focus on Africa for today. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.